Captain Daniel Grant stared at the screen on his ship's bridge. Something was wrong out there in the dark space. His crew had picked up a strange signal 3 hours ago, and they had been following it ever since. The signal was weak and broken, like someone trying to call for help but barely able to speak. "Can you understand what they're saying?" Daniel asked his communications officer. Lieutenant Amanda Price shook her head while working at her computer. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls. "It's not like any language we've heard before, Captain. The computer is trying to translate it, but it keeps changing. I think there might be multiple species sending this message." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Multiple species sending one distress call together? That was unusual. In the 50 years since humans had left Earth and joined the other races in space, they had learned that most aliens kept to themselves. The Galactic Council, which ruled most of known space, liked things organized and separate. "There I see them," said Commander Jake Morrison from his station. He pointed at the radar screen. "Captain, you need to see this." Daniel walked over and looked at what Jake had found. His eyes went wide. There were not just 1 or 2 ships out there. There were dozens of them, maybe 100 or more. They were all different sizes and shapes, like someone had gathered ships from every corner of the galaxy and put them together in one fleet. "Get us closer," Daniel ordered, "but keep the weapons ready just in case." As the ESS Horizon moved toward the strange fleet, Daniel could see that these ships were in bad shape. Many had holes in their sides. Some were held together with what looked like spare parts welded on randomly. A few were so damaged that Daniel wondered how they were still flying at all. "Captain, I'm getting life signs," Amanda said. Her voice was worried. "Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, and their life support systems are failing on most of those ships." Daniel made his decision quickly. "Open a channel. Let them know we're here to help." It took almost an hour before anyone from the fleet responded. When they did, the face that appeared on the screen was unlike anything Daniel had seen before. The alien had features that reminded him of a bird, with large eyes and a crest of what looked like feathers on its head. Amanda worked her computer, and slowly the translation began to work. The alien's words came through in broken English. "We are Vareth," the alien said. "We seek sanctuary. We have been cast out." "Cast out?" Daniel asked. "Cast out by who?" "The Council," the Vareth replied. "We are exiles. We and many others. The Council says we do not belong. They say we are dangerous. They say we cannot be part of their civilization." Over the next few hours, Daniel and his crew learned the truth. The ships in front of them carried refugees from dozens of different alien species. Each one had been expelled from Council space for different reasons. The Vareth had been kicked out because they refused to give up their traditional way of life, traveling from place to place instead of settling on planets. Another species called the Kelnari had been exiled because they modified their own bodies to survive in harsh environments. A third group, the Torvan, had been cast out simply because they questioned the Council's authority. Dr. Lisa Monroe, the ship's doctor, came to the bridge after examining some of the refugees they had brought aboard. Her face was pale. "Captain, these people are dying," she said. "Not just sick, dying. Their ships are falling apart. They've been running from the Council for months, maybe years. They're out of food, out of medicine, out of hope." Daniel looked at the fleet on his screen. Somewhere in those ships were children who had never known a real home. There were families who had lost everything, just because they were different. There were people whose only crime was not fitting into the Council's idea of what civilization should look like. "Send a message to Earth," Daniel said. "Tell them what we found. Tell them these people need help." The message reached Earth 3 days later. It arrived at a time when humanity was still trying to figure out its place in the galaxy. Humans were new to space compared to the other races. The Council had accepted them, but always with a sense that humans were on probation, that they needed to prove themselves worthy. Ambassador Helen Cruz was called to the Council chambers to explain why a human ship had made contact with the exiles. She stood in the Great Hall where representatives from 100 worlds gathered. The Council members looked down at her from their high seats. "Humanity must understand the situation," said the Krell representative. The Krell were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the Council. They had been in space for thousands of years. "These beings you have contacted are not innocent refugees. They are troublemakers. They refuse to follow the rules that keep our civilization stable." Helen listened as the Council explained their reasons. The Vareth disrupted trade routes with their wandering fleets. The Kelnari violated natural law by changing their own genetics. The Torvin spread dangerous ideas about democracy and freedom. Each species had been judged and found wanting. But what exactly did they do wrong? Helen asked. I've read the reports. The Varath were traveling routes they had used for generations. The Kelnari were just trying to survive on worlds nobody else wanted. The Torvin were asking for representation in their government. Are these really crimes? They are crimes against order, the Shevak diplomat replied. The Shevak controlled most of the trade and council space. They are crimes against stability. They are crimes against the way things have always been done. Helen felt anger rising in her chest. She had spent months studying council history. She knew that the Varath had been expelled after the Krell found valuable minerals in their migration routes. She knew the Kelnari had been exiled when their genetic knowledge threatened council medical monopolies. She knew the Torvin had been cast out because they refused to accept a puppet government the council had installed. The council says these people are dangerous, Helen said, but I think the council is afraid. Afraid of anyone who is different. Afraid of anyone who won't obey without question. The council chambers erupted in angry voices. The representatives shouted at Helen, calling her naive and foolish. They told her that humanity was too young to understand how the galaxy worked. They warned her that Earth would pay a price if they continued to help the exiles. Back on Earth, President Catherine Wells faced the hardest decision of her life. The council had made their position clear. If Earth took in the exiles, there would be consequences. Trade would be cut off. Human ships would be banned from council space. Earth's colonies might even face military action. We can't afford to make enemies of the council, said Secretary Gregory Moore. He was one of the president's oldest advisors. We're still building our fleet. We still need their technology and their trade routes. If we help these exiles, we could lose everything. But Admiral Peter Cole disagreed. He was a military man, practical and direct. I've looked at the files on these exile species. The Varath know routes through space that aren't on any council maps. The Kelnari are the best biologists in the galaxy. The Torvin build technology that the council can't match. These aren't helpless victims. These are valuable allies. President Wells sat in her office late at night, reading the messages that had come from Captain Grant's ship. There were stories of Varath children who had been born on those dying ships and never known a real home. There were reports of Kelnari scientists who could cure diseases that killed millions of humans every year. There were recordings of Torvin poets speaking about the freedom they had lost. She thought about Earth's own history. She remembered the Irish who fled famine. She remembered the Jews expelled from their homes. She remembered the refugees from a dozen wars who had been called dangerous and unwanted. And she remembered that those refugees had often become the greatest contributors to the societies that took them in. The next morning, President Wells made the announcement that would change everything. Earth would offer sanctuary to the exiles. Any species cast out by the council would find a home among humanity. The response was immediate. Within days, more exile fleets began appearing at the edges of human space. The Varath came first, their ships limping into orbit around New Boston, one of Earth's frontier colonies. Then came the Kelnari, seeking refuge on research stations. Then the Torvin, looking for worlds where they could rebuild their lives. Captain Daniel Grant found himself leading rescue missions across the sector. His ship, the ESS Horizon, became a lifeline for thousands of refugees. Lieutenant Amanda Price learned to speak a dozen new languages. Commander Jake Morrison coordinated with exile navigators to find safe routes through space. On New Boston, Governor Christine Lang watched as the first Varath families landed. They were tired and scared, but their eyes held hope. She had wondered if humans and aliens could really live together. Now she would find out. The Kelnari scientists arrived on Earth itself, where Dr. Lisa Monroe welcomed them into her research facility. Within weeks, they were working side by side, combining human and Kelnari knowledge to create new medicines. The Torvin settled on Iron Ridge, a mining colony where engineer Steve Parker showed them the facilities. The Torvin looked at Earth's machinery and smiled. They had ideas for improvements, ways to make everything work better. The Galactic Council's patience ran out exactly 6 months after Earth began taking in the exiles. Ambassador Helen Cruz was sitting in her office on the council station when armed guards arrived at her door. They gave her a message written on official council paper. She had 48 hours to leave council space. All human diplomats were being expelled. Helen packed her things slowly, watching through her window as human trade ships were turned away from the docking bays. The council was starting with small punishments, but she knew worse was coming. As her ship prepared to depart, the Shevak diplomat came to see her one last time. "Your people have made a terrible mistake," he said. "You chose sentiment over wisdom. You chose chaos over order. Now you will learn what it costs to defy the council." Back on Earth, Admiral Peter Cole had been preparing for this moment. He had known the council would not forgive humanity for helping the exiles. His defense fleet moved into position around Earth's colonies. Supply ships were rerouted through secret channels, and the exile species began to show their true value. The Verith navigators shared something precious with humanity. They knew routes through space that no council ship could follow, hidden paths between stars that their people had used for thousands of years. Commander Jake Morrison took a small fleet through one of these routes and came out 3 sectors away from where council sensors expected him to be. "This is incredible," Jake said to his Verith co-pilot. "How do you find these paths?" The Verith touched the navigation controls gently. "Space is like a river. It has currents and flows. Most species only see the surface. We learned long ago to see what lies beneath. These hidden routes became humanity's lifeline. Trade goods moved through paths the council didn't know existed. Messages traveled on channels the council couldn't intercept. Earth's colonies, which should have been isolated and starving, continued to receive everything they needed. The Kelnari scientists provided different protection. Dr. Lisa Monroe was working late in her lab when a Kelnari researcher named Sylveth came to her with urgent news. "We have detected something in the trade goods the council sent before the embargo," Sylveth said. Her voice was calm, but her body language showed fear. "It is a biological agent." "A plague." Lisa felt her blood run cold. "Are you sure?" "Very sure," Sylveth replied. "The council has used this weapon before. They used it against my people 50 years ago when we first questioned their authority. It kills slowly, spreading through a population before anyone knows they are sick. But the Kelnari knew how to fight this plague because they had survived it. Within days, they had created a vaccine. Every human world received the treatment before the plague could spread. The council's secret weapon was defeated before it could even be deployed. The Torvin gave humanity something just as important." Engineer Steve Parker stood in his workshop on Iron Ridge, staring at blueprints that should have been impossible. The Torvin engineer working beside him, an elder named Korvax, smiled at his confusion. "Your scientists say this shield design violates the laws of physics," Korvax said. "But it only violates the laws as the council teaches them. There are other ways to understand how the universe works. The new shields made human ships almost impossible to destroy. Council weapons that should have torn through human defenses barely scratched the new armor. Within months, every human military vessel had been upgraded with Torvin technology. But even with all these advantages, life was getting harder. The council's economic embargo was working. Food prices on Earth rose every week. Medicine became scarce. On the frontier colonies, people began to go hungry. And some humans began to wonder if helping the exiles had been worth it. Senator Alan Foster held rallies across Earth and the colonies. He stood in front of angry crowds and told them what they wanted to hear. "We are suffering because our leaders chose aliens over our own people," he shouted. "Our children go hungry while we feed refugees who aren't even our species. How many human lives is this compassion worth?" On the farming colony of Green Valley, the local council held a meeting to decide whether to send the exiles away. The town hall was packed with angry farmers. Mayor George Hill tried to keep order as people shouted at each other. "My son needs medicine that came from council space," one woman cried. "We can't get it anymore because we're harboring these aliens." "Is my son supposed to die for them?" A Kelnari scientist stood up. Her name was Marana, and she had been working with the colony's doctors for 3 months. She spoke through a translation device, her words coming out in careful English. "Your son's medicine," she said. "We can make it. My people have been creating it for our children for 200 years. If you give us 2 weeks, we can produce enough for every sick child in this colony." The room fell silent. The woman who had been crying looked at Marana with surprise and hope. "You can really do that?" she asked. "Yes," Marana replied. "And not just this medicine. Many medicines. The Kelnari can help if you let us." On New Boston, Lieutenant Sophie Gray was learning to fly like the Verith. Her instructor, a Verith navigator named Whisperwind, took her through exercises that seemed impossible at first. "Don't rely on your instruments," Whisperwind said. Feel the currents of space. Trust your instincts. Sophie thought it sounded like nonsense, but she tried. And slowly she began to understand. Space wasn't empty and dead. It was alive with energy and movement. The Verath had known this for thousands of years. Now they were teaching humans. These new skills let human pilots evade Council patrol ships that should have caught them easily. Supply runs that should have been impossible became routine. And independent traders from outside Council space began to notice. Captain Luis Mendez commanded a merchant vessel called Fortune's Favor. He was part of the Helix Combine, a loose group of traders who resented the Council's control over galactic commerce. When he heard that humans were breaking the Council's embargo, he came to see for himself. "You people are either very brave or very stupid," Luis told Captain Daniel Grant when they met at a neutral trading station. "But I like brave. And I really like anyone who makes the Council nervous. The Helix Combine will trade with you." More independent traders followed. The Council's embargo was supposed to strangle humanity. Instead, it created new trade networks that the Council couldn't control. And other species began to pay attention. If humans could defy the Council and survive, maybe others could too. 18 months after the crisis began, the Council assembled a war fleet. 200 ships from 5 different Council species gathered at the edge of human space. Their message was transmitted on all channels. Surrender the exiles or be destroyed. President Catherine Wells called an emergency meeting. Admiral Peter Cole stood before the Earth Assembly and gave them the truth. "We cannot win a direct battle," he said. "Even with the Torvan upgrades and the Verath navigation, we are outnumbered 10 to 1. If they attack our worlds, many humans will die." The assembly chamber was silent. Some members looked ready to surrender. Senator Alan Foster stood up, preparing to call for the exiles to be handed over. But Commander Amanda Price spoke first. "We don't need to win a war," she said. "We need to make the war too expensive for the Council to fight. And we need to show the galaxy that the Council can be beaten." The plan was daring. Human ships would use the Verath routes to strike deep into Council territory, but they would not attack military targets. Instead, they would hit the economic infrastructure that held the Council together. Lieutenant Sophie Gray led the first mission. Her small fleet emerged from a Verath route in the heart of Shevak space. They disabled 3 major trade stations in a coordinated strike, then vanished back into the hidden routes before Council defense ships even arrived. Engineer Steve Parker commanded a team that sabotaged Krell mining equipment on 4 different worlds. The Torvan technology let them slice through Council security systems like they weren't even there. The Krell lost millions in production every day the mines stayed offline. Dr. Claire Watson, a xenoanthropologist who had been studying the exile cultures, coordinated with Torvan dissidents still living in Council space. They began protests and acts of civil disobedience. Other species who resented Council control started to join them. The Council's military fleet advanced into human space, but they found empty colonies. The humans had evacuated using Verath routes, taking the exiles with them. Defense platforms attacked the Council ships from unexpected angles, then retreated before they could be destroyed. It was like fighting shadows, and across Council space the economy began to collapse. The Shevak lost control of their trade monopoly. The Krell faced shortages of resources they had taken for granted. Member species began to ask their governments why they were spending so much to punish one small species for helping refugees. It was Captain Luis Mendez who finally arranged the first negotiation. He brought together representatives from humanity, the Council, and the independent traders. Ambassador Helen Cruz returned from exile to speak for Earth. "You say we disrupted your order," Helen told the Council representatives. "But your order was built on cruelty. You cast out anyone who didn't fit your narrow definition of civilization. You punished difference instead of celebrating it. And when we offered those exiles a home, you tried to punish us too."